85% of Canadians now live in provinces where the Premier is a woman. Does this gender shift change the way business is conducted and parties interact? Joining us now for their perspectives on this, Leslie Byrne. She's co-chair of the Toronto chapter of Equal Voice. Sylvia Peshevkin, political scientist at the University of Toronto. John Duffy, principal at Strategy Corp. And Megan Harris, commentator for QMI Media. And we welcome you all to our table for a discussion about the significance of a woman being in the Premier's chair in the province of Ontario. Because after she won the convention, Leslie, back in January, apparently there was a poll out that said 70% of Canadians thought that was a significant breakthrough for women in politics. Do you agree?
Absolutely agree. It's very, very important not only to have women at the cabinet table, but in those leadership positions. And in our parliamentary democracy and in the provinces that have women in those big chairs, it makes a huge difference. Not only makes a difference in terms of letting other women know that the doors to the big office are open to them, but also in terms of decision making, because in our system, the decision making at the provincial level is led by the Premier.
Megan.
I think it's absolutely important, and I think it's an absolute milestone, and I congratulate the women who have done it. I do agree that it does provide role models for younger women, and for a lot of the decisions that are made around the family table are made by the woman, and it's great that there's someone not only at the cabinet table, but in a leadership role. And I think that's absolutely positive for Canadian democracy going forward.
John.
I think it's wonderful. I'm a supporter of Premier Wynne, so I think it's doubly wonderful. But I think a lot of this is just catching up. This is removing a barrier to discrimination, or a discriminatory barrier that happened to exist in politics, that I think society moved off of a long time ago. Anyone in advertising will tell you that car buying decisions are actually made primarily by female heads of household, which is why you don't see as many car ads as you used to on football games. These are things that have been known for a long time. Issues of family finances, what kind of insurance you want, what the mortgage is going to look like, what house you buy, what neighborhood you're going to be in. These things are decisions that are primarily made by women in society. So I think that discriminatory hang-up has largely been rolled away, allowing new types of politicians like Kathleen Wynne and Linda Dunderdale and Christy Clark and Alison Redford to move in to a space that's already been created for them. It's not to take away from their leadership and their achievement, but I think society was more than ready for this.
Kathy Dunderdale, I think.
Kathy Dunderdale, my apologies.
Newfoundland. Where are you on this?
Steve, I think it's an enormously important breakthrough. I think we need to look, though, at the dynamics of the campaigns that these women won as party leaders. We go back to the case of Kim Campbell as Prime Minister. We know it was an enormously important breakthrough, but we also know that the competitive circumstances of the federal Progressive Conservatives in 1993 were such that many of the men who were expected to compete suddenly had family responsibilities or other things to do with their time. So I think we need to ask ourselves whether these parties are in a weaker circumstance when women are winning, and the extent to which some of them can go on and win their own mandates after they've won the party leadership, the public mandate.
So great, but hold the fort.
Exactly. Let's not assume that all the barriers to women's engagement have necessarily fallen by the wayside, because we have a number of women who've not actually secured their own electoral mandate.
Megan.
I think this is a really important point, and it's something I actually wrote about a few weeks ago in one of my columns. And that is, when you look at when the women won the leaderships, it's usually when the party basically their backs are against the wall, and they've basically inherited a political straitjacket. And it's just, in some respects, you feel that it's just to put a different face in the window, trying to change the game to see if you could change the dynamics sufficiently to ensure that the party, whoever that woman now leads, continues to hold power. And look across the country. The only exception to this was Dunderdale in Newfoundland. When she got the leadership, the party was very strong politically. It was in the middle of the mandate, and she did succeed in winning. But when you look at Redford, you look at Kathleen Wynne, you look at Christy Clark, and certainly when we look at Kim Campbell, when they were passed, the torch landed in their laps or in their hand,
so they were inheriting
it was burning.
You want to agree with, I mean, do they go to women when they're inheriting a poison chalice?
Absolutely. So when the going gets tough, they hand it over. This is a good time to give the job to a woman to see if, sure, I agree with Megan, it's time to change the channel, so let's give it to a woman. But I really think that we're reaching a point at which we have enough women in these roles that it's actually going to roll over. And what we've seen, though, over the years is that voters don't care. Voters don't care whether they're represented by men or women. In fact, there may be a slight preference for voting for women. So when they actually go to the polls, it's more about where the political party happens to be and what's going on politically, and less about who the leader is and what gender your MP or MPP is, because voters are agnostic.
John, let me try this with you, because last time you were on this program a few weeks ago, we talked a bit about the fact that 20 years ago, when Lynn McLeod was the first female Liberal leader in the province of Ontario, people like you advised her that she needed to kind of be a little more macho and demonstrate, quote unquote, more masculine qualities in order to stand up to people like Mike Harris and so on. It seems this time Kathleen Wynne seems quite comfortable not doing that, being more consensual, being more, in her words, conversational. So what's changed?
Well, I think Wynne has I've been watching Wynne really closely, and it's fascinating. I think she has a style that involves approaching a situation where there are two different competing points of view and sort of pulling it together into a common ground position that links to the public interest. So I'll give you an example. You know, on casinos in Toronto, you got people who say this is the greatest thing since sliced bread and it's going to float a huge amount of the city's future. You got people saying these things are terrible. What Wynne's done is she said, look, one of the things here that you guys are going to have to settle is what's the hosting fee look like. So I can tell you this, you all sort it out amongst yourselves whether you want one or don't, but there's going to be no special deal for Toronto. That's not the same as getting in there and conciliating. It's actually drawing the point of consensus out and leading around that.
In fact, she's very carefully not taken a position on the whole thing.
The exact same pattern is being played out in regard to the transit and mobility debate in the GTA, which is a huge debate that I know has been the subject of a lot of attention on this show this week and will be going forward. You have got, in the community that cares about transit and congestion and mobility in Toronto, roads and transit, you have got so many different factions. You've got people who want this mode, this vehicle, this route, this tool to pay for it, this mix of tools to pay for it. You've never seen so many squabbling different people with a different point of view, and they all argue them with great passion. What Wynne has done is said the most important thing is to draw out of it that we're going to move this thing forward, that we're going to come up with a way to pay for it that's not just going to be the traditional tax base of property taxes and provincial taxes. We're going to do something new here, and that's the common ground point that she's drawn out. So it's not just conciliation, Steve, and in a way it solves the old problem that I used to run into with Mrs. McLeod and advised her so badly on. Because the problem used to be, if you conciliate, you look weak if you're female, and if you don't conciliate, you can come across as macho. And a phony. This is a style that she's developing that I think squares the circle really nicely.
Let me try this with Sylvia. The teachers' situation, let me put a nice neutral term on the table about that. We had Greg Lyle in this studio a couple of weeks ago, and according to his polling, solving the teachers' situation was the #1 problem this government had to face. Not health, not jobs, not the economy. It was solve this bloody teachers' issue. And she did. Are you here today to say that whatever different qualities she brought to the table as a woman helped her get a faster solution than maybe a man would have got?
Well, I think the research shows, Steve, that on average, women politicians do come from different professional backgrounds than men. On average, they are less likely to have a business or law background. They are more likely to come from what we might call the more feminized professions historically, like social work, like education, like journalism. Kathleen Wynne has a very long history as a school trustee. She has a long history of what we could call extra-parliamentary activism with the anti-amalgamation movement, Stop the Megacity here in Toronto. She's got a lot of community organizing experience. That is very different from the career of, let's say, a litigation lawyer or an entrepreneur in the business sector. And so I think that the skills that people learn through community organizing, and we saw it with the President Obama as well, those are somewhat different skills that have to do with listening, with bringing people together, with empowering them to move forward. Because frankly, the model that John was talking about in terms of decisiveness and not being seen to be weak and so on, I think a lot of people have tired of conflictual politics, and they've I think seen, in particular, the handlers of women politicians have seen that it's not effective to present a woman leader as something she isn't. If she's not a Bay Street corporate tycoon or banker or something, then you shouldn't present her as such. She is what she is, and that authenticity, I think, means something for the caucus and it means something for the public. And I think on the education file, clearly, Premier Wynne appointed a new minister, and she empowered the groups to come together and to reach some kind of consensus that I think matters for parents and matters for students.
And they did.
And they did. And I think she's trying to get out from under this poison chalice that we talked about, which is the sort of negativity surrounding the schools and teachers that comes out of the McGuinty years.
Megan.
Well, I think, number one, as we talked about earlier, women are the key decision makers in so many aspects of how the family dynamics. And with the disruptions that were caused by the labor strife between the Liberal Party and the teachers last fall, they were the ones who had to leave work early. They were the ones who all had a major role to play in trying to figure out what to do with these kids, whether or not they're able to go to work that day. And that does have an impact on everything, business, health, because your employees may or may not be showing up to work that day. And so the dynamics that come into place. But I think what's really interesting with all the ladies across the country, whether you look at Christy Clark, who's struggling, and whether you look at Alison Redford or Danielle Smith, for that matter, is that they demonstrate that there isn't a uniform way in which a woman does politics. And I think it's important to recognize that what's taking place here in Ontario is great, but each of the women are demonstrating clearly a different style of leadership.
Different from the Premier of Quebec, to be sure, as well.
Absolutely.
Let me try this with you. We've got a minority parliament right now, but it is an utterly unique situation because we have, of the three parties represented in the legislature, two now led by women. Does that genuinely bring a different dynamic which might affect the way this parliament either does or doesn't work?
I think it does, and I think we've seen, if you have the time to watch Question Period, how it's changed in the last couple of months. It's not that it's fewer difficult questions. It's not that people are being less challenging to the government, or that the government's they aren't being as tough on the opposition. It's that there's a different mood in the room, and you see the leaders having different kinds of conversations with one another. Equal Voice just had an event at Queen's Park where Christine Elliott, the deputy leader of the Conservative Party, Andrea Horwath, the leader of the NDP, and the Premier stood together and talked about the same issue in very similar ways. I think that makes a big difference to how the business of the House happens.
So tell me this then. We've got two female party leaders, and you have, who are very popular according to the polls. You have one male Conservative Party leader right now, who is the least popular according to the polls of the three leaders. How does this affect what Tim Hudak has to do in terms of his job?
Well, I think Mr. Hudak at this point in the electoral cycle is mostly concentrated on narrow casting to the 30-some-odd% of the public who are of a mind to vote Conservative, want an election now, and just want Tim to stand solid and bring this government down and let's get it over with. He may have to pivot if we get into an election and expand his narrative a bit. But for now, steady as she goes. The fascinating thing to watch here has been Ms. Horwath, who had a very easy time of it being the voice of reason and the conciliator against late-stage McGuinty government, which appeared to be something of a hardline, macho, tough guy, major minority. Look, we didn't win the election, really, but we won it near enough, so you're going to do what we want to do as though we had a majority. That was a very unfortunate casting for Mr. McGuinty, who's not actually one of life's natural bullies. But Horwath was able to make him look like a bully. Her popularity soared during that period. It has come off very significantly since then, and Kathleen Wynne has occupied a lot of the political space and is drawing a lot of the support that Ms. Horwath got by that dynamic happening. Now comes the ultimate test. Over the next several weeks, we're going to have a budget. Does Ms. Horwath become an obstructionist, non-cooperator who wants to force an election, thereby undoing all the good work she did as the conciliatory voice and appear to be really kind of the bully? Or does she find a way to make it out as though the government are sliding into their old wicked ways? It's quite a fascinating dance.
Megan, let me follow up again with Tim Hudak on this one. I'm picturing the leaders' debate during that next election campaign whenever it happens. There has never been a case where one man looked across and saw two women as his adversaries.
Politics, yes.
Ontario.
in Ontario politics. Never happened before. Does he have to change his game plan when he looks up and sees two, according to the polls, reasonably well-liked women as his adversaries?
He absolutely has to be very careful that he does not come across as condescending or that he comes across as being arrogant. He really, the dynamics have completely changed than if it were three men standing there. And the first analogy that comes to mind is when Joe Biden had to debate against Sarah Palin in that first vice presidential debate in 2008. I mean, we know Joe has foot and mouth disease at the best of time.
And so does she, in fairness.
Well, she does, but at that time, the momentum was going with her going on the ticket. And so he had to ensure that he did not come across as being condescending. Because, I mean, she just spoke in run-on sentences and didn't know much about much that mattered.
Which is not the case here in Ontario.
Which is not the case here in Ontario, but he still has a very fine line that he needs to be very careful.
I wonder whether let me just be completely contrary to all of you for a second here. I wonder whether we are generalizing here in a week, or I guess not too far removed from a week when the world was remembering Margaret Thatcher. And when we think about who is the most boisterous, loud, aggressive, some might say obnoxious, bloviating member of the Ontario legislature, you're all waiting for a name, aren't you? It's a female name, folks. It's Lisa MacLeod. I think you'd find lots of people, Lisa MacLeod from Nepean Carleton, who say she is one of the worst. Are we overdoing this, Leslie, kinder, gentler politics that women bring?
No, I don't think so, because it's not
Despite
about,
the examples I just gave.
No, it's not about kinder, gentler politics. It's about a different kind of conversation that happens. So is Lisa tough? Yes. But does Lisa have, and she's shown this in the past, does Lisa have a different kind of perspective on what it's like to be a mother, to be a citizen, to be connecting into her constituents? I don't think so. I think that while she may be tough in the legislature, I think Lisa gets that she has a different job representing the women of her riding than some of her male counterparts
You'd be
do.
hard-pressed to say that Lisa MacLeod has brought a different style or approach to politics than a man would. She gets admonished by the speaker as much as anybody.
But Steve,
Go ahead.
I mean, the point is we have an ideological difference, right? I mean, women on the political right are often leading political parties that have fairly tough stances on things like military involvement, which is not relevant here in Ontario. But in Thatcher's case, it was certainly relevant on the Falklands. And they tend to be much more fiscally conservative, and they often are sometimes much more socially conservative. And so I think the way a leader, presents issues is related to the substance of the ideology of the party. And so in Ontario, we're dealing with two women who are leading center-left and center parties, respectively. And I think the way in which they reach their voters is quite different than the way the leader of a party of the right reaches out to the electorate of that particular ideological stream. On average, more women in politics have been elected from parties of the center and the center-left historically, because they're the ones that allowed women to have membership in the main party, and they were much more open to a sort of egalitarian approach to nominations and so on.
Thatcher's the real outlier then.
Thatcher is very much a real outlier.
But let's put this into context. When Margaret Thatcher won the Conservative leadership in 1975, she beat the Prime Minister, the former Conservative Prime Minister, and she beat him quite handily. And if you think of the time, the context in which she took over that leadership, Britain was on his knees by the labor unions, and the IMF was coming in and really.
Okay.
But so that's a different time. But let's go back to today. I think it's unfair to say that. Well, first of all, yes, the NDP has had a history where they did allow more women, they allowed more minorities to
They didn't just allow.
Right. And so, yes, they have that history. But at the end of the day, each party has a different constituent, and they need to ensure that they secure their bases. And so how a party goes about doing that, and how the leader demonstrates his or her capacity to not only make the decisions, but to keep the party support that he or she needs, and then also to broaden that in order to win election. I think at the end of the day, we saw it out in the East in the election in Alberta. They wanted to win, both ladies, and they did exactly what they needed to do to try to do that.
John, if part of the deal in having female politicians in positions of leadership is that good role models, and opens the door to other women who might otherwise not get a shot. Margaret Thatcher was a big zero. She didn't appoint one female cabinet minister in her whole time as prime minister.
She did appoint one, Steve.
One?
Briefly.
Okay.
The government leader in the House of Lords, briefly.
The government leader in the House of Lords.
And she dumped her because she lacked presence.
So nobody in the House of Commons then?
No.
She dumped a lot of men, too.
5 of the top 6 jobs in Ontario today in cabinet are female. There's a difference here, right?
Yeah, I think there is something going on. I mean, I see Thatcher, I said this last time I was on with you, I see Thatcher as one of these pioneering gender benders who actually, you know, it was a commonplace when I was in university and Thatcher was in power that she's tougher than any man. It was just something that everybody said. And similarly, I think you couldn't ask for a more classically feminine leadership style kind of figure than Bill Clinton, who, you know, famously said, "I feel your pain," which is a classically sort of feminine stereotype thing to say. I think there's 2 things that are going on that are actually changing things and make it different from Thatcher's 80s. First of all, I think we know more about discrimination than we used to. The dynamic here is mostly, it's not some fad for female leadership, it's removal of a piece of discrimination. And if there's one long-term effect that's been going on in developed world societies for 50 years, relentlessly, it's been removal of discriminatory barriers. First on the basis of skin color, then on the basis of gender, then on the, and there's still a long way to go, but that's the main thing to look at. So that secular trend is also coinciding with, I think, something else that refers to what Megan was talking about. The world is a little less militarily scary than it was 30 years ago. We are no longer staring down, you know, SS-20 missiles pointed at us from the Ukraine. We no longer have Cuban Missile Crises. Yes, there are terrible things that happen in the world, but the challenges are different. And so the kind of classic protector, defense-oriented leader profile that would take you to a male figure in a kind of very ancient and primordial psychological sense. I want a big guy with a big club who's going to stop them from coming to the cave and hurting me and the kids.
We don't need that as much today.
That's not needed as much. The challenges we've got are more subtle. They're about environment. They're about economics. They're about other things.
Health, education.
Health
so
and
let me ask
education
Leslie this.
That play to different skills.
With just a couple of minutes to go here, are you going to go so far as to say we get better leadership when women are in positions of leader?
I think we get a different kind of leadership. I think we get better leadership when we have a diversity of voices at the table. And I think that's the barrier, one of the barriers that John's talking about that's really changed. Catalyst has excellent evidence about what kind of financial difference it makes to a company's bottom line when they have a diversity of race and gender at the table. Unfortunately, politics isn't so neat. We can't measure it by financial return. But we do know that you do come to better decisions when you have a diversity of voices, and I think that's a positive thing.
Sophie, do you think, given the qualities that women bring to the table versus what men bring to the table, we actually get better leadership when the woman's a PM or the woman's a premier?
I think we get better leadership, Steve, when we see women being able to take decisions, for example, on military intervention with all the facts at their hand, and when we have men, for example, John mentioned Bill Clinton, who are able to talk about the emotional side of leadership. I think we're starting to see more of a mixture of the traditional traits, and I think that's what citizens benefit from. But I still think that there are a lot of obstacles, particularly the research in the U.S. that shows since 9/11 it's been hard for women to move forward as leaders because of a sense that there is a threat, that there is a sense of social insecurity, and we kind of go back to that older view about who's going to protect us and who should get the 2 a.m. phone call.
Right. What's that one? Is it New Hampshire? Is it New Hampshire that has 2 female senators and every member of the House of Representatives is female as well? They have all of their national politicians are female? For what it's worth. You want to go last on this one? You get better leadership when a woman is in the chair?
You do get, I agree that you do get a different slice type of leadership, but at the end of the day, I think what's important is that having women in these leadership positions shows that women are tough enough to make the tough decisions when they need to, and they can lead large, complex organizations.
Gotcha. That's our time, everybody. Thanks so much for coming in. Our thanks to Leslie Byrne from Equal Voice, Sylvia Bashevkin from the University of Toronto, John Duffy from Strategy Corp, and Megan Harris, QMI Media.
Support Ontario's public television. Donate at tvo.org.